Well, but it was, I think 2018 when we were stuck in the high school is the first time we had Chris out, if I'm not mistaken. Is that right?
Yeah, I spent three slightly gloomy weeks because, unfortunately, the normally beautiful Jacksonville area was extremely smoky, and so it was really fun to get to know everyone, but I feel like I didn't get the true Brit experience because we were in a high school instead of out on the beautiful hill.
Yeah.
But it was really, really, really fun experience. I got to conduct the orchestra, which is probably the first, possibly last time I'll ever be professionally brought in to conduct an orchestra, but extremely good learning experience in terms of the composer's relationship with the orchestra and the feeling of how it even, I mean, definitely one of my big things with that great program is to thinking about how the work is actually conducted much more than I used to. And I think in the past I was like, oh, he'll figure it out, she'll figure it out, and then now it's more like, oh, what is the beat? How can the conductor move the tempo and things like that? And so I think the commission was already in place, and Third Coast was playing at one of the other Brit events, not like a summer event, right?
Yeah, because we've brought Third Coast out on two different occasions, I think, right, David? Yeah, it's part of our education programs where we put professional musicians in schools, and he did some work over at SOU with Terry Longshore's studio as well. And then like you were saying, Chris, like the commission was more or less in place, like we were planning on doing it, but we weren't sure what exactly it was going to be. And then David Third Coast came here, and the pieces just kind of fell into place because
I think it was
you
your
guys
idea, Mark,
already.
wasn't it?
I was the one that first brought it up actually because they had just been here, and I saw the concert and it was amazing. And then I saw that you had already done work for percussion, and it was all kind of just.
And I'd already written two pieces for Third Coast already at that point. So
right.
Well, Chris, the first time I heard your work was before I even knew you, and it was specifically for percussion. It was when you were. I think it was the record release event.
Yeah,
in New York for your solo percussion work, which is unique because I think the percussionist has to build the instruments, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, my piece of Memory Palace.
And I will say, when I was going to that concert, I knew of your work, but when somebody said, "Oh yeah, you have to build all the instruments yourself," I thought, okay, that sounds kind of gimmicky. I remember being just blown away from the first couple of notes of that music. I was so impressed by how natural it was, and I mean, I remember reading about the piece and you talking about the sense of nostalgia that you had in writing it, and I felt that the whole time, which is it's not every day when you hear a piece of music you've never encountered before that you feel totally connected to it, and that was my experience. I thought, this is a person. I think I wrote you a note like the next day. Like,
you did, yeah. And
then full circle, you actually ended up writing a new percussion work for the orchestra. Now this one does not include as many instruments, like you don't have to actually build everything.
No, but there are 40. Dave, how many? It was like 45 slats of wood,
something like that. Yeah, that are made by the performers. They're not a manufactured instrument. They're slabs of hardwood that, when you cut to certain dimensions, hold a pitch.
So let's talk about that just for a little bit, because I think maybe your average listener doesn't really know the extent of what it means to be a percussionist. I think they, generally your image of a drummer is, a relatively limited number of instruments doing a certain kind of work. But obviously being a percussionist in the broad sense of what you all do can mean such a diverse spread of not only instruments that you have to be able to play, but, styles and roles. So, I mean, and also, I mean, David, you're not in the orchestra in the way that a lot of percussionists end up. So, what is that like for you? What's your world like?
It's I mean, it's everything you said. That percussion is the oldest instrument, second only to the human voice. I'm reminded of by my 2-year-old daughter like every day. It's innate, and it's so on that one hand, there's something kind of very natural about it, and percussion instruments are found in every culture, on every inhabited part of the earth throughout history. As a percussion ensemble, we draw on a ton of traditions that include the Western classical canon and the instruments that are a part of that, but also expand well beyond that to percussion traditions all over the world. Plus, we, as you said, we build our own instruments. Everything from something that's simple, relatively simple, like the blocks of wood that Chris calls for in his piece, to more elaborate handmade instruments. So the cool thing that I love about what we do is that it's always changing, and every piece that we play can have an entirely different sound world. And even though our approach is always the same, the sound world is limitless, and it keeps it really fresh and really fun for us. We don't play. Beethoven never wrote a piece for percussion quartet. Unfortunately, even Stravinsky or Bartók never wrote pieces for percussion quartet. But composers like Edgar Varese or John Cage were the first ones who wrote works that are in the concert classical Western European tradition for only percussion instruments. And so really what we do comes out of that lineage. But what we do now, and this includes Chris's piece for us and so many other projects that we do, are about really work that's not so different from what Bartók in particular did, sort of looking at all of the music of the world through a lens of our training, which is this sort of very particular Western classical training. But I don't think Chris's piece sounds like Beethoven in a really good way. I mean, I like Beethoven, but Chris, you're drawing from so many different influences that I feel like are influences that you probably studied in school, and influences that are just a part of the musical world around you. That's what we love. That I feel like percussion lends itself to that.
Lexi, when we get to you as a member of the orchestra, you don't know, you're coming at this at the very last part of the process. You don't know what the piece sounds like. I mean, Chris he conceived it, David's lived with it, and then, generally, right, when we play new music, we're often confronting for the very first time at the first rehearsal. So what's the process like, for this piece, or just in general when we're dealing in an orchestra with new work and living composers?
Well, I showed up at Brit for the first time in 2018, which was the first piece we did with Chris. And coming from a fairly traditional orchestral background, I thought, oh gosh, we're doing new music. Okay. And, I was playing principal second, so I got the score. What am I going to do? And but then, yeah, I mean, I prepared as much as I could and got there, and it was so beautiful, and it all just made so much sense and felt so right, like what you were saying when you first heard some of his stuff. Like, I don't know, it was such a good fit for the orchestra, and I felt like we had such a great working relationship. And then, so to get then to the second year when this came up, I thought, oh, okay, this is going to be exciting and cool. And then, like you were saying, putting the percussion in front of the violins, I was like, thank goodness, because I spent my entire life trying to lead and be with them and play off of them. And suddenly, they're right there where I need them. And I really felt, especially with this ensemble, it was such chamber music during the piece. And we really found the rhythmic intricacies that we could play off of with very specific instruments for each section.
Well, let's talk about this piece. What is it all about? Does it have a backstory? I mean, it certainly has a good name. Meander, Spiral, Explode.
It is a good name. I stole it. It's a book by Jane Allison. It's called Meander, Spiral, Explode. And my friend, who's a novelist, Tim Horvath, texted me about it and said, this is a really cool book. It talks all about the way structure can work in books that is not conventional, which is just start, build to climax and resolve. And she identified 3 common forms in literature that were the meander, the spiral, and the explosion, as amongst others. And I just thought it was such a great title. And it feels to me like the first movement has this kind of wandering feel where it goes to different places. And the second movement has this kind of feeling of spiraling upwards as it gets faster and kind of more, repetitive. And then the last one has this like energy where she talks about different, like a white hot center from which tendrils all flow out. And I'm like, this is it, And I remember because I think someone from Brit was on my case, and someone from the Chicago Civic Orchestra who co-commissioned it was super on my case about a title. Like, what's the title? And I'm like, I don't know. And so like a month before the premiere, this came to me. And
someone from Brit.
David, in the solo part for Third Coast, what are some of the the techniques or the elements of it that give it its particular character? I know that there is a complex network of instruments that each person plays. I think it's actually laid out in stations, right? And I mean, everybody has a different sound world within their parts, and then you've got obviously all those parts combining.
Yeah, there's instruments that we all share, which the main one that comes to mind is these wood slats that we've been talking about, wooden planks. Each of the four players have some of those, and they're spread throughout the ensemble. But then each also have what we kind of refer to as pieces of furniture, which are the big instruments. So there's a marimba and a vibraphone, a glockenspiel, that sort of thing. Wooden planks, similar to the ones we use in Meander, Spiral, Explode, have been called for by composers for at least a couple decades. But something that Chris did is he sort of had this realization and inspiration to ask for the pitches of those instruments to be very specific, because it is totally possible to do that. I mean, they're the type of pitched percussion instrument where you almost wouldn't necessarily recognize it's a pitch unless it's reinforced by another instrument with a very solid fundamental, like a violin. Thank you, Lexi. But once that reinforcement is there, all of a sudden you have this like phenomenal thing of hearing a sound that is undeniably percussive, but that sort of secretly has a pitch to it. And because of the nature of that instrument in particular, there's all kinds of other cool things you can do. Like you can iterate on the instrument, you can play it like extraordinarily quickly and hear each of the iterations. So Chris asks us to do that both in the first and in the last movement, particularly the last movement, which has almost kind of a moto perpetuo feel to it.
Definitely.
Yeah, we're just like, hammering away on these things. And it creates this like vibrancy and energy. The other thing that I love, the second movement of this piece is like one of my favorite pieces of music. Non-exclusive to music I've played or commissioned or anything like that.
Thank you,
yeah, I mean it. It's a really simple melody that, as Chris was describing, kind of spirals, and it has a trance-like quality. I think the movement does, and props to Teddy because Chris asks us to cello rondo gradually speed up, only like 20 clicks or something like that, a pretty almost indiscernible amount over the course of the entire piece, and it's insanely difficult to do that even if you're a soloist, let alone conducting an orchestra of 60 people. And I think it came off so well in the performance that we did.
That part is so difficult. It's really difficult to conduct it because also you're not conducting beats that align with how the music sounds.
Oh, I know.
You're conducting beats that are, because you're dividing fours against threes, I think, and people are playing in different metric units sonically than the actual beat. So when you try and speed people up, they're speeding up at a proportional rate, but not with your beat. But I will say that it's one of those things where oh man, it's really difficult. Why is this so difficult? But the sound is incredible, and I've had that. I have to say, weirdly enough, ever since we started this conversation, I've had that the gamelan, the scale. It's stuck in my head this whole conversation because it is extremely distinctive and it's very Cerrone, and it's it's arresting. It's an amazing sound that you don't hear that coming out of an orchestra in any other context. I wonder, Lexi, do you remember that?
I remember being panicked about the ensemble at that moment. But the thing was, luckily, I mean, you're super clear, but also there were kind of always these big connecting points. You could never get too far off from where you were supposed to be. If that maybe happened a few times in rehearsals.
I mean, one has to kind of think about who has the most time with things, who has the least time with things. You deliberately make it harder for the conductor and the soloist because they are going to rehearse it, and that the orchestra has 2 or 3 rehearsals, so you have to kind of. It's always designed to put the difficulty upon the people who have the time to process the difficulty. But yeah, that was something I learned kind of in the working with Teddy as a conductor, was that it is the second movement is a solo for conductor along with the quartet in a certain way, that very gradual speeding up, which really is very, very tricky to do, and it really it takes a very focused conductor to do it.
Well, that's one of the powerful things about it. Actually, you have the same thing in the piece that we did the year before. There's also a very gradual
you're right.
speeding up. But there are moments when the conductor is really needed. I think we talked about this when you were learning to conduct at Grit.
Absolutely.
One of my 2 extremely distinguished students. I'm very proud. I've had Sloan and Caroline Shaw as my 2 and my only conducting students. And one of the things we talked about is that there are moments when the conductor truly is just confirming things for everybody, not driving the ship, not trying to get in people's faces. And there are moments when you have to leap into action, and you've got to take the wheel, and otherwise you'll just land up on the rocks. And I think that you integrated both into that, because the last movement flows. Like the last movement, I'm simply just confirming between the orchestra and the soloist. But in that second movement, you feel like you are lifting like a A380 up into the air the whole time, like very carefully and gradually. I don't know if the conducting lessons influence that.
No, it definitely did. And yeah, it's funny because the third movement's kind of like directing traffic. You're just like, all right, it's flying. That one's I feel like that. I mean, I feel like if nothing else, I've gotten a lot better. I mean, so much I think of being a composer is to kind of work within the limitations of what there is time to do, basically. I mean, if I would write a very different orchestra piece if we had 70 rehearsals, it's sort of the way the Rite of Spring did. But knowing you're going to have 2 or 3, I think you just, I think it's a great set of, I think all artists have to learn how to work within limitations of different kinds, and that is, a very orchestra is the most possibilities and the most limitations, and so you have to kind of figure that out. But something I do think about a lot is to exploit naturally occurring things, I think, a lot of the time. And I think a lot of this piece also just takes advantage of, there's a solo with the glockenspiel and the cortales in the second movement that is like kind of creates this wobbly out of tune sound, and and then it's doubled with the flutes and unnatural harmonics on the violin, and so a lot of this stuff just naturally can't totally be tuned, and you tell players, like, play this just slightly out of tune, you're going to get a mess. But if you just set up situations where things will just be slightly out of tune deliberately, it's like such a nice experience, and that's sort of exactly what happens in that second movement. So I think a lot of, for me, about percussion is it is imperfect in a way that, I mean, I think the violin is like literally perfect. You couldn't I wouldn't do anything to the violin, and to me, I love the violin, and I'm always trying to make it a little less perfect for that very reason. But in my writing and finding these things that are a little bit odd, and with percussion, I think exploiting the fact that like so much of what you guys do is not perfectly pitched. It's like these wood slats, it's these bells, but they're or these low tie gongs with crazy overtones, and so you just set up these scenarios where these are mixed with other things, and you're going to get an unpredictable, like, not unpredictable, but results that I think are quite striking, because rather than going out of some crazy, it's setting up, it's dealing, like, if you set up, you set the string players, here are my 47 microtones, and learn each one, and this one's 10 cents, and this one's 11 cents, they're going to look at you like you're an idiot and just not do it, because they have 2 rehearsals. But if you just say, play this natural harmonic, don't correct it, you know what I mean? Then it'll do the same thing in 5 seconds.
I have to say,
you would get such a different sound from a very traditional instrument, and I wasn't having to do any extremely unusual techniques, and yet the result was something I'd never heard before.